It hit like a public execution disguised as a routine announcement, and everyone felt it at the exact same moment. The Chicago Sky didn't just make a decision, they sent a message so cold, so calculated, that it instantly rewrote Angel Reese's place in the franchise. No warning, no soft language, just a brutal reality check that exploded across the league in seconds. One minute she was the face of the fight. The next she was being quietly pushed aside, while the organization looked the other way. And the reaction? Pure fury. Sources close to the situation say Angel Reese was blindsided, boiling with anger as the message became impossible to ignore. This wasn't about minutes, it wasn't about numbers, it wasn't even about basketball anymore. This was about identity, about hierarchy, about the Sky making it painfully clear who they believed could lead them forward, and who they no longer trusted to carry the weight. Fans immediately saw the comparison forming, and it cut deep. Caitlin Clark's name hovered over everything like a shadow. No one wanted to acknowledge leadership, availability, trust. While one star was being elevated as the gold standard, another was being quietly labeled the problem. And once that label sticks, it's almost impossible to peel off. Social media erupted into chaos. Teammates went silent. Insiders whispered about broken relationships, and closed-door meetings filled with tension. Every old quote, every missed game, every awkward moment was suddenly reframed as evidence. Angel Reese wasn't just being criticized, she was being replaced in the story. And as the league watched this unfold in real time, one terrifying question took over the conversation. If this is how Chicago ends it, what happens next when Angel Reese decides she's done being patient? From the very beginning, Angel Reese's relationship with the Chicago Sky was never simple, never calm, and never quiet. It was forged in intensity, expectation, and a promise that felt bigger than basketball. When she arrived, she didn't tiptoe into the league, she stormed in with confidence. Cameras following her every move, fans hanging on every word. Chicago didn't just draft a player, they embraced a lightning rod. Angel brought attention, emotion, and an unapologetic edge that instantly changed how the franchise was perceived. At first, it felt like destiny. Reese played with raw fire, attacking the glass like every rebound was personal, flexing after buckets, daring the league to match her energy. Fans loved it, the Sky leaned into it, marketing exploded, jerseys flew off shelves. Angel wasn't just producing, she was selling. And in a league desperate for stars who moved the needle, that mattered. For a moment, it felt like Chicago had found its identity. But beneath the surface, cracks were already forming. Angel's intensity didn't switch off in the locker room, she demanded more. From teammates, from coaches, from the organization itself. She spoke openly about standards, about not accepting mediocrity, about wanting to compete for championships immediately. To some, that sounded like leadership. To others, it sounded like pressure. Veterans who had survived years in the league heard her words differently, not as motivation, but as judgment. The losses didn't help. Close games slipped away, chemistry wavered, and every time the Sky struggled, the spotlight snapped right back to Angel Reese. When she dominated, she was celebrated. When she struggled, the criticism doubled. The same passion that once made her marketable slowly became polarizing. Chicago found itself balancing two realities. Angel was their most visible star, but also their most complicated one. Injury issues only deepened the tension. Availability became a question mark. Timelines blurred. Day-to-day turned into weeks of uncertainty. Coaches adjusted rotations. Teammates wondered who would be there on game night. And in a sport built on trust and repetition, that uncertainty started eating away at the foundation. Quiet frustrations grew louder behind closed doors. Meanwhile, Angel's voice never softened. She spoke about the need for better pieces, for experienced winners, for a roster that could match her ambition. Those comments didn't land in a vacuum. They landed in a locker room filled with players who had fought for every contract, every minute, every season in the league. What Angel saw as honesty, others felt as dismissal. The front office was caught in the middle. They wanted her star power, they needed her production, but they also had to manage relationships, culture, and long-term vision. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tone shifted. Support became conditional. Praise became selective. Big moments weren't amplified the same way. Something that once felt like partnership began to feel like tolerance. And hovering over all of it was the unspoken comparison no one wanted to say out loud. Around the league, Caitlin Clark was being praised for transparency, composure, and elevating everyone around her. Every time that narrative grew louder, it made Angel's situation feel heavier, not because she lacked talent, but because the league was clearly deciding what kind of star it wanted to champion. By the time the Sky made their move, the emotional distance was already there. Trust had thinned. Patience had worn down. What looked sudden to the public had actually been building for months. And the pain Angel felt wasn't just about being overlooked, it was about realizing that the franchise she gave everything to might have already moved on in silence. Because when belief fades, quietly, the betrayal feels louder than any public announcement ever could. The real explosion came when the PS Chicago Sky stopped pretending. What looked like a routine honor turned into a public line in the sand. And Angel Reese felt it immediately. Naming Camila Cardoso as Player of the Year wasn't just recognition, it was rejection. Wrapped in a smiling graphic and a congratulatory caption. Inside the league, people understood the subtext instantly. This wasn't about one season. This was about control. About who the organization trusted. About who they were ready to build around, and who they were quietly done defending. Angel didn't hear it from a phone call. She didn't hear it from a meeting. She heard it the same way everyone else did, online. In real time, watching her status evaporate in front of millions. Insiders say her reaction was instant and visceral. Not sadness, rage. The kind that comes when you realize the room has already decided you're the problem. Teammates noticed it too. Text threads went quiet. The locker room energy shifted from tense to fractured. People stopped speaking freely. Every look felt loaded. Then came the first shocking twist. Within hours of the announcement, whispers began circulating that this decision had been finalized long before the season ended. That meetings had already happened. That internal voices had questioned whether Angel Reese was the right face for the next phase of the franchise. Not because of talent, but because of optics. Availability, control, consistency. Words that sound neutral until you realize who they're aimed at. The Sky didn't deny it. They didn't clarify. They didn't even try to soften the blow. And that silence told Angel everything she needed to know. Her earlier comments about needing better teammates were suddenly reframed, not as competitive honesty, but as evidence. Evidence that the organization had been collecting quietly, waiting for the moment to act. The narrative flipped overnight. Where Angel once looked like the engine, she was now painted as the disruption. Where she once carried losses on her back, she was now blamed for them. It was ruthless, efficient, cold, and the comparisons started flooding in. Caitlin Clark's name trended alongside Angel's in a way that felt intentional. Availability versus absence. Praise versus criticism. Leadership versus volatility. Even people who didn't want to compare them were forced into it. League voices began talking about reliable stars. About faces you can trust. About who elevates everyone else. Each phrase felt like a dagger, because none of them mentioned Angel but all of them excluded her. Then came another twist that made the situation even darker. A source close to the locker room hinted that some veterans felt relief after the announcement. Not joy, relief. Relief that the tension might finally break. Relief that expectations might reset. Relief that the spotlight wouldn't burn so hot. That rumor alone detonated fan spaces. Supporters felt betrayed not just by the front office, but by the idea that Angel had been isolated inside her own team without knowing it. Angel's camp noticed everything. The reduced promotion, the sudden shift in tone, the way her name stopped coming up in long-term conversations, and for the first time, people close to her started asking a dangerous question out loud. What if Chicago was already preparing to move on? Because when a franchise sends a message this loud without saying a word, it's rarely accidental. It's strategic. It's positioning. It's the first move in a larger game. And as Angel Reese sat with that realization, one truth cut deeper than all the rumors combined. This wasn't about proving she was better, it was about surviving a narrative that had already decided she wasn't wanted anymore. The situation didn't just intensify, it spiraled. And the second major twist made it clear this was no longer about awards, minutes, or even locker room chemistry. This was about power shifting in real time. Within days of the Player of the Year announcement, league insiders began floating something far more explosive. Chicago's front office wasn't just distancing itself from Angel Reese. They were actively reframing her value across the league. The language changed first. Executives stopped using words like cornerstone and centerpiece when her name came up. Instead, phrases like complex fit, long-term flexibility, and exploring options started leaking out in conversations that were never meant to be public. Agents heard it, coaches heard it, other teams definitely heard it. Angel Reese wasn't being discussed as the future anymore. She was being discussed as a variable. That's when the panic set in. Because once a franchise, starts subtly lowering the temperature around a star. It doesn't take long for the league to follow. Suddenly, every past moment was reinterpreted through a harsher lens. Her technical fouls weren't competitiveness anymore, they were volatility. Her confidence wasn't leadership, it was ego. Her injuries weren't bad luck, they were unreliability. The narrative hardened fast. And Angel could feel it closing in. Then came the second major twist, and it shook everything. A prominent WNBA insider hinted during a radio segment that Chicago had already gauged trade interest, quietly, without making calls official, not shopping her aggressively, just checking temperature. That single phrase sent shockwaves through fan bases, because you don't check temperature unless you're already considering the move, and you don't consider moving a star unless you believe the relationship is fractured beyond repair. Angel's camp went into high alert. People close to her say she felt blindsided and furious, not just at the possibility of being moved, but at how quickly the organization had allowed her image to be reshaped without defending her. No statement, no pushback, no reminder of what she'd meant to the franchise, just silence. And silence in moments like this is never neutral, it's permission. The comparisons to Caitlin Clark became unavoidable now. Media voices leaned into it harder, openly contrasting Clark's availability, composure, and team-first messaging with Angel's chaos-filled storyline. It didn't matter that the situations weren't equal. It didn't matter that the rosters, coaching, stability, and timelines were completely different. The league loves a clean story, and Angel's was being rewritten into something messy. Inside the Sky locker room, tension reached a boiling point. Players were walking on eggshells. Some felt caught in the middle. Others worried about their own futures if the franchise was willing to ice out its most visible star. Trust eroded quickly. Conversations stopped being honest. Every interaction felt political. Angel Reese wasn't just fighting for her reputation anymore. She was fighting isolation. And then, as if the situation wasn't volatile enough, another detail surfaced that poured gasoline on everything. Angel Reese was noticeably absent from multiple team-adjacent events and promotional pushes, where she once would have been front and center. No spotlight, no amplification, no reassurance. Fans noticed immediately. Social media lit up with side-by-side comparisons of how the franchise now promoted Camila Cardoso versus how Angel was being treated. The contrast was brutal. One was being elevated as stability, the other was being quietly erased. That's when supporters started saying the word no franchise ever wants to hear attached to its brand. Expendable. Angel wasn't just angry, she was cornered. Her value was being questioned publicly, her loyalty was being doubted internally, and the longer Chicago stayed silent, the more it felt like they were letting the storm do their work for them, letting the narrative turn so that when the next move came, it wouldn't shock anyone. But here's the most dangerous part of all. Angel Reese is not the kind of player who absorbs pressure quietly. She doesn't retreat, she doesn't disappear. And people close to her say the anger she felt wasn't destructive, it was clarifying. Because once a star realizes the organization is preparing life without her, the question stops being how do I fix this, and becomes where do I go next? And as that thought settled in, the league held its breath, because if Angel Reese decided to take control of the story herself, Chicago wouldn't be the one dictating the ending anymore, and that's when things really get dangerous. The public fallout was instant, vicious, and completely uncontrollable, and once it started, there was no spinning it back. Fans didn't wait for confirmation. They didn't wait for statements. They reacted from the gut. Social media became a war zone overnight, with Angel Reese supporters accusing the Chicago Sky of betrayal, manipulation, and quiet character assassination. Hashtags exploded. Comment sections turned feral. Old clips were resurrected. Screenshots weaponized. And every moment of Angel's career in Chicago was relitigated in real time. What made it worse was the silence. No reassurance from the Sky. No defense of Angel's contributions. No attempt to calm the narrative. That absence didn't cool emotions, it validated them. Fans interpreted it as confirmation that the organization had already emotionally detached. People began saying the quiet part out loud. They're done with her. And once that belief took hold, the backlash escalated from anger to grief. Former players chimed in carefully, but their words still cut deep. Vague posts about stars being scapegoated and organizations choosing convenience over courage spread fast. Every like from a WNBA player was scrutinized. Every follow felt like a signal. Caitlin Clark's name kept surfacing not because she said anything, but because she didn't have to. Her silence was framed as professionalism. Angel's silence was framed as volatility. The double standard ignited even more outrage. Inside Chicago, the tension leaked into the open. Reporters noted awkward body language at practices, shorter answers, forced smiles, teammates deflecting questions instead of addressing them. Fans began speculating about divided loyalties in the locker room. Who still supported Angel? Who was relieved by the shift? Who was scared they'd be next if the organization decided to reset again? Trust doesn't fracture loudly, erodes quietly. And that erosion was suddenly visible. Angel Reese's fanbase didn't just defend her, they mobilized. They pointed out the franchise's dependence on her marketability, ticket sales, national attention, merchandise. They argued that Chicago benefited from Angel's fire until it became inconvenient. Others pushed back, saying winning culture matters more than star power. The debate turned toxic, deeply personal, and impossible to escape. Neutral observers were dragged into it whether they wanted to be or not. Media coverage intensified the divide. Some analysts echoed the organization's apparent stance, framing Angel as difficult, emotional, and unreliable. Others pushed back hard, warning that the league was punishing a young star for being too visible, too demanding, too unapologetic. The conversation shifted from basketball to gender, race, and how women are expected to lead. Every take added fuel. Every segment widened the crack. Then came the emotional breaking point. A short clip surfaced of Angel Reese leaving a facility. Head down, expression unreadable, no interaction, no acknowledgement. 10 seconds was all it took. Fans projected everything onto it: hurt, rage, resolve. It became symbolic of a player carrying the weight of a narrative she didn't create but was being crushed by. That image spread faster than any statement could have, and once it did, the story stopped belonging to the Chicago Sky. The fallout wasn't just loud, it was lasting. Sponsors watched closely. Other franchises paid attention. Agents took notes. Players around the league quietly asked themselves a dangerous question. If this can happen to her, who's next? Because when a star is publicly reframed this aggressively, it sends a message far beyond one city. It tells players how quickly loyalty expires, how fast narratives can flip, how fragile face of the franchise really is. And as the noise refused to die down, one truth became impossible to ignore. This wasn't a temporary storm. This was the kind of emotional fracture that changes careers, reputations, and futures. Careers, reputations, and futures. The only thing left unanswered was how Angel Reese would respond, because whatever she did next would either cement the story Chicago was letting form, or blow it apart completely. The final twist didn't arrive with a trade alert or a breaking news banner. It arrived in the form of intentional silence. And that silence was louder than anything said before. While fans waited for clarification, for reassurance, for even the smallest sign that Angel Reese still mattered to the Chicago Sky's future, the organization did something chilling instead. They moved forward without mentioning her at all. Insiders noticed it first. Internal language shifted again. Conversations about next season stopped including Angel's name. Media briefings emphasized culture, accountability, and reliability. Words that sounded harmless until you realized who they were quietly excluding. No one said Angel Reese didn't fit. They just stopped describing a future she could exist in. And in professional sports, omission is the cleanest form of rejection. Then came the detail that froze everyone. A league-connected source hinted that Chicago's front office believed the backlash would eventually burn itself out, that fans would move on once the next chapter began. That belief alone reframed everything. It suggested the organization wasn't rattled. They weren't scrambling. They were prepared. Prepared to let the narrative run. Prepared to let Angel absorb the heat. Prepared to let time do the separating for them. Angel felt it. People close to her say. The anger shifted into something sharper, clarity. The realization that this wasn't about proving herself anymore. Not to coaches. Not to fans. Not to the league. This was about control. About deciding whether she would continue fighting inside a story that was being written without her consent, or whether she would step out and force a rewrite on her own terms. Because here's the part. Chicago may have underestimated, Angel Reese doesn't disappear quietly. Every move she made suddenly felt deliberate. Every appearance carried weight. Every silence felt intentional. The league watched closely, waiting for the moment she'd crack or explode. But neither came. Instead, there was composure, calculation, a sense that she was absorbing everything, storing it, preparing, and then the most unsettling realization surfaced. What if Chicago wasn't dumping Angel Reese? What if they were losing control of her? Because a star who feels cornered doesn't beg. She doesn't apologize. She doesn't shrink. She looks for leverage, and Angel Reese has leverage in places Chicago can't control. Attention. narrative, and the ability to make any next destination feel like redemption. Other franchises noticed, agents noticed, media voices started subtly shifting tone, framing Angel less as a problem and more as a miscast centerpiece, a player whose fire required a different environment, a different philosophy, a different kind of protection. The idea took hold quickly, too quickly for Chicago to ignore. And that's when the cliffhanger truly set in, because the next move isn't Chicago's. It's Angel's. She can stay and fight a narrative that's already turning against her. She can force the organization to either recommit publicly or expose the distance completely, or she can leave, not quietly, not bitterly, but strategically, and let the league watch what happens when that fire is placed in a system. Ready to embrace it, no announcement has been made, no trade has been confirmed, no statement has been released, but the silence now feels different. It feels like the pause before impact, and when Angel Reese finally decides to move, whether with her voice, her play, or her presence, it won't just change her career, it will expose whether the Chicago Sky made a calculated decision, or a catastrophic mistake they won't be able to undo. Now it's on you. Because this story doesn't end in a front office, it ends in the court of public opinion. Was the Chicago Sky right to distance themselves from Angel Reese in the name of culture and reliability? Or did they just push away a star whose fire they never truly knew how to handle? Be honest. If this were any other player with her production, her visibility, her impact, would the reaction have been the same? Drop your take in the comments and don't play it safe. Should Chicago trade Angel Reese and move on for good? Or are they making a mistake that will haunt them the moment she thrives somewhere else? And here's the real question nobody wants to answer out loud. If Angel Reese had been quieter, more agreeable, less demanding, would this story even exist? If you want every layer of this drama as it unfolds, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications right now, because the next update could flip everything overnight. A trade rumor, a statement, a sudden shift in tone, and when it happens, you'll want the full context, not the watered-down version. And one last thing before you go. When Angel Reese finally gets the chance to write the next chapter of her career, will the league see it as redemption? Or will Chicago realize too late that they let the wrong star walk away? Say it in the comments. This story isn't over, it's just waiting for its next explosion.